Every year, Americans are expected to pore over the achievements of innovative and famous Black Americans under the auspices of Black History Month in February. And while I certainly believe that Black History Month is well intended and that many people do it in order to commemorate things that they believe had not been commemorated enough in the past, I think Black History Month is tantamount ultimately to a self-flagellation ritual that we put our culture through every single year. And perhaps there are better ways. Perhaps there are even more efficient ways to ensure that we recognize the contributions of Americans who may not have been heard without segregating them from the rest of the course of American history. Well, what do I mean? We can't simply look at Black History Month in terms of what it is seen in our culture today as. We have to look at it in the context of what is going on and what has been going on over the past 50, 60 years within America. Over the past 50 and 60 years within America, there has been a sophisticated effort happening from cultural and social forces to artificially impose diversity through force in every level of American life. Whether you see this with affirmative action, whether you see this with the introduction of bias trainings in institutions in America, whether you see this with the introduction of DEI trainings within America, which began in the mid-21st century, around 2004, or rather the beginning 21st century, whether you see it in terms of certain kinds of programming you see on your TV in Hollywood, the idea that there needs to be more Black representation in entertainment, regardless of where you see this agenda play out, it's all a part of the same agenda to impose diversity from on high and to therefore, in the beliefs of these do-gooders, make American society better. Well, Black History Month, perhaps wittingly or unwittingly, is a part of this whole cultural project. The truth is this, my friends. In order to truly have a good society, in order to truly recognize the genius of people who may have been ignored by our history in the past, we need to de-emphasize things they did not have any control over. And we need to emphasize what they do and have control over and what they did with what they have control over. The very simple truth is this. Black History Month is Black history is American history. There is no need to separate Black history from the general course of American history. You have to understand something. History is not simply a record. It's not simply a docket that you learn in class. History is rather a shared narrative that all of us in a particular area or geography have that can unify us towards a certain end. And that is the most important thing. Because the moment we forget that is the moment we actually lose sight of what history means, and people with certain agendas can then take our lack of understanding and translate that towards political, cultural, and social capital for their own agenda. The truth is also this. Many people that are praised during Black History Month are rather people whose contributions didn't just benefit Black people, but their contributions benefited and still benefit us today, all of us as Americans. Let's take, for example, the figure of George Washington Carver. Now, George Washington Carver is misunderstood as the person who invented peanut butter. He didn't do that. But what he did do is George Washington Carver, before anyone else, innovated the uses of the peanut in order to make it into a source of so many different products, whether that be oils, whether that be mayonnaise, whether that be chilies, whether that even be sauces, or even also coffee. And every single one of us, many of us and Americans at least, have used or still use one of those products in our everyday life. I know for me, I love coffee. And George Washington Carver's innovations helped us get to a place where the advancement of coffee was happening in America. Or let's talk about the example of Mary Von Britten Brown. Now, Mary Von Britten Brown is credited with inventing the first closed-circuit home security system, effectively starting what is now a multi-billion-dollar industry, which is projected to grow immensely by 2030. This one woman who had an idea and innovation managed to inspire in the culture an entire industry that now helps people defend and preserve their lives better than they would have been able to do without having that industry? How many of us have seen videos of Ring doorbells and the kind of craziness that happens there? And how many of us have seen the kind of people that have been captured solely due to this footage? It all began with Marie Van Britten Brown. The truth is this, my friends. The list of universal accomplishments from African Americans are immense, and they have deeply enriched American culture. But the entire idea of Black History Month is an attempt, a project, to separate those universal achievements from the shared narrative, from the stream of American history, and rather put them in a separate category that, by that very action, demeans their significance. If the entire goal of the past 60 years of the civil rights movement has been to achieve equality, that was the goal at least. Now the standard has changed to equity. But if it was equality, then the entire goal, the entire emphasis should not be on separating us, but rather by looking at our commonalities as human beings and having them be the ethos around which we gather, plan, organize, and think. This is how you get a good society. But rather, Black History Month goes against the ethos of equality and endorses the ethos of separation by saying that we need to have a separate bucket that is divorced from the shared narrative, that is divorced from the shared culture, that is divorced from the overarching values of the American experiment, and that belong in its own separate category. And by doing that, Black History Month has become a witting tool of cultural forces who are pushing things like diversity, equity, and inclusion, who are pushing things like bias training, who are pushing things like anti-white racism, which exists, unfortunately, who are pushing a lot of other things to obtain higher or perhaps even lower political narratives. The moment you have an idea conceived on the basis of separation and on the basis of giving undue importance to separate ideas, is the moment you let people who want to separate the society, who want to divide the society, get power by the very nature of that thing. And this brings me to the cultural condition we are right now in America. In America right now, there are people who are unwitting victims of race-based ideologies that have no interest in actually helping us obtain the eudaimonia of our humanity, that highest potential, that have no interest in actually helping us build better social relations, that have no interest in actually helping us refine the mind. Because if the mind is in a gutter place, if the mind is not refined, your society and your cultural norms will similarly be unrefined. They will similarly be in a gutter place, and they will be inferior. And yet there are people who are pushing this stuff. And diversity, equity, and inclusion, every single plank of that phrase is a part of this project. Diversity no longer means looking at our commonalities as human beings within the context of a rich human nature, as it should mean, but rather it now means looking at our differences and then using our differences as value statements and value judgments and prisms by which we view the world. Equity no longer means, as it did in this 18th century, abiding by the principles and rules of natural justice, which is dictated by natural law, which is a system of principles and tenets that we deduce from the very nature of reality and then enshrine into our political and social order to ensure that there is moral systems going on. Now it means, post-1980s, that we should instead have justice as a means to appropriate resources to certain groups on the basis of people being in those certain groups and on the basis of absolutely nothing else. Distributive justice, as it is called, this sort of oxymoron that has dominated our political and social discourse for the past 50 and 60 years, that is what is now the standard in many institutions. And inclusion is no longer about having a bunch of ideas come together. It is about having one single domain, one single plane of ideas that is then pushed forth by cultural forces that rely on coercion, that rely on tyranny, and that rely on force, and do not at all foster cooperation amongst people that have different ideas. And in an age where DEI reigns, in an age where race-based ideologies reign, Black History Month is a witting tool of the tyrants. It's not easy to hear. It doesn't comfort us, but it is the absolute and verifiable, empirically sound truth. And I speak to everybody, not just black people. I speak to everyone when I say this. If we really want a society that is based on real justice, then we can't use these prisms to view the world, because these same prisms are being weaponized against white people to make them feel inferior, make them feel bad, make them feel as if they are all victims, or rather all perpetuators of a bad system, make them feel as if they all have a similar level of culpability in the condition of black Americans, make them feel as if they are the enemy. This is why these academics concoct terms like white fragility and white privilege. It's all an attempt to demonize another group and then to elevate another group over the other group, which is basically the essence of multiculturalism. The idea that the dominant culture is the enemy and the source of all of our ills in the world, and the minority cultures, by virtue of being minorities, are virtuous and must be elevated by force. It's Cultural Revolution 2.0. That's basically what it is. And what happens when we have this anti-white racism? What happens is very simple. You create a new generation of racists that rise up and want to defend their people. So you have a mentality created in their mind that is divorced from reality and more indicative of the same bad paradigms that brought forth Jim Crow, that brought forth discrimination, that brought forth so much racial nonsense in American history. You don't defeat these things by continuing to persist in these things. But another reason why, and I'll close on this, that Black History Month is concerning, is because its very conception is based on giving an undue value to race and rejecting individuality. What do I mean? Well, the inventive and the genius Carter G. Woodson was actually the individual, according to many sources, that put into place the modern day version of Black History Month. It can be argued that if it wasn't for Woodson, Black History Month wouldn't be a thing. Well, Woodson said in his justification of Black History Month that he appealed to the idea of a race needing to have a collective sense of history. He is quoted as saying the following: if a race has no history, it has no worthwhile tradition, it becomes a negligible factor in the thought of the world, and it stands in danger of being exterminated. Woodson mixes a half-truth, i.e. the importance of history, with a lie, namely that a race has a history. Woodson's initial argument for Black History Month, quite literally, by virtue of being collectivist, by virtue of prioritizing the group of the individual, separates Black Americans from the universal tradition of America and collectivizes their race. This leaves no room for the true domain in which genius is acknowledged, which is in the heart of the complex individual human being. This leaves no room in which true genius should be actualized, which is in the context of a voluntary society based on goodwill and a pursuit of objective morality. This leaves no room for a healthy social system where equality and where our sameness brings us together, as opposed to our differences splitting us into different factions and causing tribalism and enmity within man. Woodson's initial conception of Black History Month, from which this conception, Black History Month, was created, quite literally embodies every single problem seen in the race discourse in America over the past 50, 60 years. If the premise is wrong, as the laws of logic dictate, if the premise is wrong, the conclusion must necessarily be false. Let us not separate the achievements of legendary Black inventors and thinkers from American history. Let us not see George Washington Carver or Mary Van Britten as Black inventors. These are fundamentally American inventors whose insights were only possible in a country like America, whose moral paradigm enables a level of individual and human greatness not seen in any point in history until America was conceived upon those solid phrases and words, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Those are not feel-good words that simply get you emotionally riled up. These are an acknowledgement of what man needs to survive in this world. And by virtue of that, it's an acknowledgement of what the truth is. And by virtue of that, it's an acknowledgement that man must live in accordance with the truth. And if he does that, he can then flourish. Let's not see these people as black American figures. These are American figures, part of a special, philosophically rich, universal tradition that is the most unique and perhaps even the best in the history of the political systems of the world. That is why we need to get rid of Black History Month, move past it, and integrate these heroes, these visionaries, into one single tradition. The same tradition that Thomas Jefferson is a part of is the exact same tradition that Carter G. Woodson is a part of. The exact same tradition that Booker T. Washington is a part of. The tradition of George Washington is the tradition also of George Washington Carver. The tradition of John Adams is also the tradition of Martin Luther King. That should be praised. And every month should be a month where we adulate these figures in our society and we seek to learn and study their lives and then implement what they did right into our own lives and learn from their mistakes. That is the only way you get to a healthy learning system in America, in the world. That is the only way I think we can actually help combat some of the forces that seek to tear us apart and seek to degrade the quality of our society. A standard that we need to look at, as opposed to looking at diversity or whatever, because standards do matter. The standard that we must look at as Americans is most certainly the standard of moral equality, where merit, achievement, skills, and personal genius are held in high esteem as quintessentially American. And the dead-end thinking of separation, division, race-based thinking, gender-based thinking, sex-based thinking is abandoned forever. When we assert the standard of merit over the standard of rather simply identity, we will arrive at a better cultural condition, I promise you. My friends, like this video, comment this video, subscribe to this channel. Also be sure, if you want to support me, to donate to me. All the links are in the comment section down below. My friends, study history, study philosophy, remain morally convicted, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.